Hi yogis, welcome to your tutorial of Lotus Pose. And so Lotus Pose is something you might have seen, when you think of like yogi kind of meditating or something in the caves of somewhere far, far away. And it's a very it's a difficult posture that a lot of us may not really realize how challenging it could be for our bodies. So I'll offer a few poses that work up to Lotus. It's not exhaustive by any means, but it's a few hip openers and quad openers, inner thighs that can kind of work up to a Lotus pose. And so for Lotus, it's a lot of external rotation in our thigh bones, flexion of our knee joint, and then strengthening all across our legs, but especially our ankles. And so Lotus Pose, it's a lot for our hips. We hold so much emotion in our hips. I don't know about you, but if you've ever cried in a hip opener in class, it's a little overwhelming sometimes. So please take your time with this. There is no destination. There is nothing you have to do, nothing you have to look like. Just really listen to your body when trying to move into your Lotus Pose. And so I'd start with Hero's Pose just to kind of open our quads. And these are all just a few suggestions, things that I do when I work up to my Lotus Pose. And so we don't really think about, external rotation with our thighs or quads. And so for this one, you might have really tight quads. This is great to open up and lengthen the quads from the hips. And so you might stay here, option 1. And this is more neutral, and we'll work into externally rotating with our hips. But for neutral right now, lengthen your quads, see how that feels. You might stay here 5-10 minutes even if you find a little tension in your body. And also something I didn't mention was that there's 2 kind of different types of sensation in your body. And so you might feel some stretching or discomfort in your muscles, and that's okay as long as there's no pain. And then on the other side, you might feel some kind of sharp, more tense pain, and that can often mean your your bone is hitting your bone. That is something you do not want to work against. So if you feel tension in your muscles, that's something absolutely you can kind of breathe through, practice your way through, take your time. But if you feel maybe your thigh bone is hitting your hip bone, please do not push through that. It's more your anatomy. Sometimes our anatomy doesn't want to let us do the poses that we think we need to do. So listen to your body. And option 1, Hero's Pose for the quads. Let your body settle, let your legs settle. If this feels good, you might take the second posture. And so for Lotus Pose, I think I mentioned a lot of quads, a lot of inner thighs and outer hips. And so for our Hero's Pose, it was for our quads. And this one, butterfly, you might have seen this in studios, in classes, online. Soles of your feet together, knees wide. And so you can already see this is very similar to Lotus. And you might stay here. You might also keep blocks underneath your knees if you have 2, maybe a book or something to keep your knees elevated. And so your inner thighs can really let go and sink, relax. You might hold ankles, and so your chest can float up. And then again, different variations for even butterfly pose. If you have quite tight inner thighs, you might walk your feet slightly further away from your pelvis. And this might allow your knees to widen a little further. If you have very open inner thighs, you might walk your heels closer towards your sit bones and then actively press your knees down. And so that really depends on your body. Of course, don't do anything that causes you pain. And just trying to work your way through. Really take your time through all of these postures. And this is a little more static. You can always add some movement, kind of flapping your wings in butterfly, a little more dynamic. We do want to look for warmer muscles or work into warmer muscles. And so our body isn't completely cold and when we tend to be a little tighter. And so you can add some movement. This is butterfly and a couple different postures. And so again, external rotation, moving into a lizard pose. And so you can walk your right foot slightly forward, hands inside, and back leg extends out long. You can use, I don't know, a towel, something to cushion your back knee, a cushion, double up your mat, and then turn your toes out, so externally rotating your leg about 1-2 o'clock for your right foot, hands inside. And so this is a really great hip opener as is. You might stay here, really juicy. Option 2, come to the outer edge of your front foot, keep your toes pointing up towards your knee, and you'll notice that you want to keep your toes and your knee pointing the same direction. And this takes any load off your knee joint. And so this is option 2. Again, you might be static, you might be more dynamic with your movements and swing your hips side to side. Depending on your body, your needs, you might take it a little further if you need that extra bit of sensation. You might lower down to your forearms. And as you can see, this kind of closes the hip crease. And so it might be a little more ask of your hips. And again, if that's okay with your body, you might try this out. And then just as Lotus needs opening in our quads, you might bend your left leg, reach back with your right hand and grab the outside of your foot. And so this stretches the front quad as well as our hip flexor of our left leg. And then you might take this and sway your hips side to side, do whatever you need to do, and you might just stay still. And then for these postures, it's nice to stay for a few breaths at least, but take your time to settle into these movements. Okay, and once you're done there, release your back leg, place your hands down, and then you might walk your left knee forward, and then switch sides. Left foot, walk your right knee back, and then hands are inside your front foot. And really press your hands down, untuck your back toes, and then you might stay here, foot flat. You might come again to the outer edge of your foot, point your toes up towards your knee, and then swing your hips side to side, letting that go. Again, for that quad stretch, you might reach back, hug your heel towards your glutes, press your right hand down, and float your chest open. And so those are all options. But one thing I really wanted to point out was for Lotus Pose. To keep our joints safe, which is the most important thing, you can always take a little look at your anatomy. And so lengthen your legs out and really find your sit bones. You might sit on a block to lift your chest. And so we want external rotation from our hip. And so watch as you turn your toes out, your knee turns out, and your thigh. And so we don't want just our toes, but our knees still pointing up. We want all of this to turn in one line. And so same thing. And that all goes in one movement to keep our joints safe. And that is the most important thing. Right, and so moving back to our butterfly, you can either stay here. You might extend one leg out, and then the sole of your left foot or right foot inside inner thigh. And then just see how your knee joint, it flexes in, so your calf and your thigh kind of touch together, and let your knee fall down. And this is kind of the movement we want to see in our Lotus Pose. And then for our ankle, it's very, very easy for our ankle to kind of relax in, and so our foot moves up, but our ankle stays the same, our shin stays the same. We want to keep some strength and alignment in our ankle, and so we move in one. It's not just our ankle moving. And so staying here, you might sway side to side. You might side bend to get some more axial extension of your spine, and something that you might look for in our Lotus, and so we're not kind of crunched over. And so staying here, letting your hips sink open, your hamstring lengthen on the other leg, and then switch sides. Lengthen one leg, sole of your foot against the other thigh, and then take your time. And again, blocks are really nice underneath your pelvis if you'd like to elevate your hips for this one. That can also feel really good. And so Lotus isn't just about having open hips. It has everything to do about front, back, inside, outside of our legs. And so the key is taking your time moving into Lotus Pose. And then you might even turn your toes in and out. Lots of little wiggles and things that you can do to warm up your muscles. but keeping them safe at the same time. And so once you feel good there, my last little suggestion to move into Lotus, something that I do, is taking thread the needle. And thread the needle can be done very, very different in different classes depending on your teacher. I'll start on my backs. And so again, thread the needle is a hip opener. For this one, you'll have your feet down, squeeze your shoulder blades together, and then cross your right ankle over your left thigh. And so already you can see a little bit about how your leg works. If your knee is very close, that means you need to work on externally rotating your thigh bone. And if your kind of ankle sickles in or out, maybe you need to work on ankle strength. But do keep your toes and your knee pointing in the same direction in any of these postures. And so option 1, you stay here and really work on pressing your knee forward. And this is externally rotating our thigh. Option 2, lift your left knee up towards your nose, and then interlace your hands in the window of your legs, just behind your hamstrings or just at your hamstrings. And then you might use some muscular contraction of your arms, lifting your knee towards your face. Keeping your toes pointing up towards your knee is really important here. And then you might breathe. Option 3, if you have open hips, you might lower left foot and then baby cradle right leg into your elbows. And so the bottom of your right foot into your elbow, the knee into your elbow, and then lengthen your left leg down. And keep your shoulder blades on your mat. And this is a huge opener for your right hip. Only take this option if you can keep your shoulder blades comfortably down and there is no pain whatsoever in your hip joint, your knee, or your ankle. And this is really great for especially your foot to press into your left arm to keep your ankle strong. And so to get out, bend your left leg, release, and then you might take it down. And so straight to the other side. This one, I'll give you another option. So thread the needle, ankle, toes up towards your knee, keeping your ankle strong, your knee joint engaged, and then option to lift right knee, arms inside the windows of your legs, interlace your hands. An option, a baby cradle, just as we did. And for this one, if this doesn't feel like too much for you, you can always release your ankle back down. And this is when I would usually kind of get up onto my hands and spin your fingertips back to open your shoulders. And then windshield wipe your ankles side to side. Again, only if that feels good for you. Keeping your toes flexed, your ankle working, and your quads engaged. Right, and so those are a couple options. Our last one is a little more static, and it's a variation to Lotus if Lotus just doesn't work in your anatomy. And so moving back to center, releasing foot, uncrossing your ankle. And so this last one before we try Lotus Pose, I would recommend getting a block, maybe 2 blocks. And you can, of course, have something a little shorter than this one. This one's a little tall. Otherwise, you might turn it on your side or turn it upward. And so this one is called Fire Log. And so we'll have our shin, our bottom shin, about parallel to the long edge of your mat. Again, keeping toes pointing up towards your knee and your ankle lifting. You're still keeping some strength in your ankle. And then you can stack your other foot, your top foot, just on the top of your right knee. And then this is where your block might come in handy. Right in between your foot and your knee joint. And so we want to be parallel with our shins, but we don't want any pain in our outer hips. And so this one is really, really great if your Lotus Pose isn't comfortable or if it's too painful for you. This is really great. Fire Log. And so you can take the block on the other side as well. It's good to switch sides, and so you're not always moving on your dominant leg. And so shin parallel, toes are pointing up towards your knee, your ankle is strengthened, top foot against your top thigh, and then block underneath your knee. Spine up, chest up, and arms, shoulder blades down. You might even lift your block a little higher, maybe even super high if you're not quite there. That's totally okay, but do use your blocks to help support your body. And so you might stay here. All right, last one. If you'd like to move into Lotus Pose, you can always just try it out. And so from here, you might just take a little release, knee side to side. And then we'll move into it one side, one leg at a time. And so think, important parts, externally rotating our legs, which is moving our knees outward, lengthening of our quads, strengthen our ankles, and keeping our knees neutral. Okay, so from cross-legged, which is where I usually start, lifting the right heel up towards the crease of our hip, so at the very top of your thigh. And this is when ankle strength comes in handy to lower knee down. You're flexing your knee joint, externally rotating your thigh bone, and then you stay as is. And see how that feels. Maybe it feels really good. You can try the other side. Same thing. Lift top heel to stack over your hip. And flexion of your knee. Strengthen your ankle. Toes are still pointing up towards your shin bone. And then you might stay here, Lotus Pose. And again, if this causes any pain, you can take any of those variations, maybe even loosen your Lotus Pose, keep your spine straight, your shoulders relaxed, and especially your face. You might close your eyes. And taking any variation is really great to open the hips, even if you don't move to a Lotus Pose right away. And so that is a little short tutorial for Lotus, something you might have seen in Yoga Journal or any of the yoga classes that you've taken. But the most important thing about Lotus is just practicing externally rotating your hips, just keeping safe in your knee and strengthening your ankle, and time. Really take your time moving into it. Listen to your body.